There are stories that rise like mist from the rivers, stories that breathe between the stones of forgotten castles, and their voices are older than language itself. They are whispers that remember the shimmer of moonlight on the still waters, the pulse of hearts that dared to love across the fragile lines separating the human from the divine. Among them, one name lingers with the sweetness of sorrow and the echo of flowing water, Melusine. She was not merely a spirit of the waters, nor a woman of flesh and blood. She was the space between, half belonging to the shimmering depths, half to the trembling warmth of the human world. To speak of Melusine is to speak of duality, of love that is both sanctuary and curse. Her story lives in the hush that falls when the moon touches a river, when the world pauses, suspended between dream and waking. No mortal can claim to have seen her without feeling the ache of wonder, nor can any heart recall her without the weight of longing. The ancient songs call her a daughter of enchantment, a creature born from the sorrow of a mother's curse and the tenderness of a secret desire to be loved. She moved through the world with a grace that silenced time, her footsteps leaving only ripples, and her gaze carrying the softness of moonlight veiled in mist. It is said that Melusine's home was among the rivers of Poitou, where the forests murmur like sleeping giants, and the air carries the scent of moss and memory. On nights when the sky dissolved into silver, she would emerge from the depths, her skin pale as porcelain, her hair dark as the depths of the lake she came from. To those who glimpsed her, she appeared human, too human, perhaps, for eyes that did not know how to see the divine. But beneath that fragile illusion, the water still called her name, and her soul was never at rest. There is something irresistibly tender in the notion of a being forever divided within herself. She longed for warmth, for touch, for a life beyond the eternal silence of her element. Yet she carried within her veins the pulse of rivers, the ancient rhythm of tides that obey no mortal heart. Every breath she took in the world of men was a quiet act of rebellion against her own nature, and every moment of happiness carried the quiet tremor of an inevitable loss. Her existence was a secret written in the language of longing. She belonged to no one and to everything. The wind would whisper her name to the leaves, the water would shape her reflection, and the moon would dress her in its glow, as if conspiring to hide her truth. But truth is a patient thing. It waits, it watches, it emerges when the heart dares to believe it can remain unseen.
The legend tells us that Melusine was bound by a vow. Every Saturday, she must retreat into solitude, hidden from all eyes. For on that day, the illusion of her humanity would dissolve, and her true form would rise like a shadow from beneath her skin. Her lower body would shimmer into scales, the graceful tail of a serpent or dragon unfolding where once there were legs. It was not a curse of ugliness, but of revelation. Her beauty became too pure, too dangerous, too otherworldly for mortal sight. And so secrecy became her salvation, love her peril. For love, in its purest form, is curiosity made tender. It seeks to know, to understand, to unveil. And for a creature whose life depended on concealment, love was both the promise of belonging and the seed of her undoing. Melusine's heart, like the waters she came from, was vast and deep, She could love with the devotion of a tide drawn to the moon, yet she knew that the gaze of a man could shatter everything she was meant to hide. Still, the heart is not ruled by caution. It beats even when it should not. It reaches even when the light it reaches for will burn it to ashes. The air in her legend is always scented with secrecy, the kind that tastes sweet at first, like honey on the tongue, before it turns heavy with the salt of tears. It is a story that breathes through the skin, that wraps itself around the listener like mist, whispering of the fragile beauty that exists only when love and fear coexist in perfect balance. In the shadowed stillness of medieval Europe, where forests stretched endless and faith mingled with superstition, her tale grew like ivy on stone. People feared what they could not understand, yet they were drawn to her. Perhaps because she mirrored what every soul knows but rarely admits, that we are all divided creatures, torn between what we are and what we wish to be. The monks wrote of her with trembling pens, warning of temptation and deceit. The poets sang of her as the emblem of forbidden love, of devotion so complete that it defied reason. The villagers, when they spoke her name, lowered their voices as if afraid to wake the river. But beneath every retelling, there lingered a pulse of tenderness, a recognition that Melusine was not evil, but tragic. She did not seduce out of malice, but out of longing to be understood. In her, the sacred and the sensual merged. The glimmer of water upon her skin was not only beauty, it was symbol, invitation, danger. She embodied the eternal pull between purity and desire, between the world of men and the ancient, untamed realm beneath. Each whisper of her legend carries that ache, that exquisite tension.
To listen to Melusine's story is to surrender to that same pull. It is to feel the cool breath of the river against your neck, to hear the echo of your own heartbeat mingling with the murmur of unseen currents. It is to understand that love, when touched by mystery, becomes both salvation and destruction. When the moon rose full over the waters, they say she would stand at the edge, her reflection trembling between two realities. The night wrapped her in silver, and for a moment she seemed at peace. Perhaps in that reflection she saw herself whole, neither cursed nor blessed, but simply existing in the eternal rhythm of the world's longing. There are myths that teach through fear and myths that heal through beauty. Melusine's does both. She reminds us that what we hide often defines us as much as what we show, and that to love something truly is to accept its shadows as part of its light. The old stones of ruined towers still remember her. The rivers still hum her melody beneath the rush of water. Some say her descendants walk among us still, marked by an inexplicable grace, by eyes that hold the shimmer of tears not yet shed. Others say she appears on the battlements of her ancient castle, weeping for the love that could not endure. But perhaps the truth is simpler, more human. Perhaps Melusine never left. Perhaps she lingers in every moment when love defies reason, in every secret that trembles to be revealed, in every kiss that feels like both a promise and a farewell. Her myth endures because it touches something elemental,
the yearning to be seen, even when being seen means breaking apart. And so she remains, half woman, half water, the whisper of the impossible woven into the breath of the world. To know Melusine is to step into a dream of silver and sorrow, to walk the fragile edge where love becomes legend. And as the story begins, the moon waits above the river, patient and pale, watching for the shimmer that will soon rise from the depths. The water stirs, the night holds its breath, and somewhere beneath the mirrored surface, she awakens once more, beautiful and doomed, ready to love again in defiance of the curse that bears her name. For love, like water, cannot be contained. It slips through fingers, defies its boundaries, reshapes the world with quiet persistence. And though every legend ends, the river always remembers. In that remembrance, Melusine lives not as a warning, but as a whisper of what it means to feel completely, to desire deeply, to exist between two worlds and call them both home. She came to him not as an apparition, but as a presence, soft, luminous, and inexplicably real. The forest had fallen silent that evening, the light of the setting sun spilling through the branches in ribbons of gold and rose. Raymondin, weary from his own misfortunes, wandered without destination, guided only by the ache of a heart that sought meaning. When he first saw her, she stood by a spring so clear it reflected both the fading light and something deeper, something eternal. Her hands traced the surface of the water with a gentleness that felt almost reverent, as though she was speaking to it in a language older than words. She did not startle when he approached. Her eyes, those strange, pale eyes that seemed to hold the reflection of every moon that had ever watched the earth, lifted to meet his. There was no fear there, only quiet knowing. It was the kind of gaze that undresses a soul, not a body. It was not seduction, but revelation, and in that moment, Raymondin felt as though he were the one discovered, not she. Melusine spoke little, yet her voice carried the rhythm of flowing water, low and tender. She asked his name with a softness that turned the question into an invitation. And when he answered, she smiled, not the bright, careless smile of mortal women, but something gentler, tinged with melancholy. It was as if she already understood how fragile this encounter was, how easily it could dissolve into the air like mist at dawn. He told her of his sorrow, of betrayal and exile, of the hollow ache of a life turned to ruin. She listened with the stillness of the moon, her attention unbroken, her compassion unfeigned. When she spoke again, her words fell upon him like light on dark water. All things that fall can rise again if they are loved. There was power in her simplicity, a quiet certainty that disarmed him. In her presence, his shame and anger melted away, replaced by something he could not yet name. It was neither lust nor worship. It was an awakening. To Raymondin, Melusine appeared divine, yet painfully human. There was fragility in the way her fingers trembled when they brushed his, as if touch itself was an act of courage. She carried the scent of rain and the faint salt of tears, a trace of both purity and sorrow. He did not yet know that every breath she drew among mortals came at a price, that love for her was always edged with danger. He saw only the wonder, the beauty that seemed to belong to another world, and the promise of redemption reflected in her gaze. For Melusine, the encounter stirred something long forgotten, the human heart beating before her, the warmth of another's nearness, the unspoken promise of belonging. It all drew her like the pull of a tide. Yet beneath that gentle surface lay a deeper current, fear. Fear that the fragile line between her two selves might break, that the light of love would expose the truth she must keep hidden. But how can one born of mystery resist the call of the mortal soul that hungers for her presence?
Around them, the world moved with quiet inevitability. Destiny had set its course long before their first meeting. Melusine's mother, herself a being of the other world, had cursed her daughters for a father's sin, condemning them to bear the marks of their lineage. And though Melusine had sought to rewrite her fate through love, the curse lingered like a shadow at the edge of her happiness. The forces that shaped their lives were not merely human jealousy or divine punishment. They were the laws of nature itself. Water could not live without reflecting the sky, nor could Melusine exist without the truth of what she was. In her attempt to bridge the two realms, she had become both miracle and omen. Raymondin's family and kin saw her as a marvel. They admired her wisdom, her grace, her uncanny ability to bring prosperity wherever she went. Yet their admiration carried unease. Whispers followed her through corridors. Glances lingered a heartbeat too long. People feared what they could not name, and Melusine, so perfect, so serene, was too much like a dream that might vanish if looked at too closely. As their fortune grew, so too did the fragility of their bond. Love, when untouched by truth, begins to echo with questions. Why must she vanish each week? What secret does she guard with such devotion? Curiosity is the twin of desire. It feeds on the same hunger, and once awakened, it does not sleep again. Raymondin's heart began to wrestle with itself. He loved her utterly, but love mixed with fear becomes doubt, and doubt is the beginning of ruin. There were moments when he watched her from afar, his soul torn between reverence and suspicion. She would move through our home like a vision, her touch healing, her laughter light, and yet he felt the cold breath of the unknown between them. Melusine felt it too, the distance, the unspoken questions, the slow unraveling of trust that she had built so carefully. Still, she loved him with a patience only the eternal could know. She loved him not for what he believed her to be, but for the fleeting illusion that she might belong among mortals. Her heart was a fragile bridge between two worlds, trembling under the weight of love and secrecy. She knew the danger of revealing herself, the pain that would follow, and yet, deep within her, there was a yearning to be fully seen, to no longer hide, to let her truth shimmer in the open light, even if it cost her everything. This was the balance upon which their lives rested, enchantment and fear.
love, and concealment. Each touch between them carried both tenderness and peril. Each word of affection was a quiet defiance against fate. And as the moon traced its path over the world, the tension grew, subtle, invisible, but constant. The water remembered, the curse waited, and love, beautiful and doomed, continued to bloom between them like a flower that opens even as it knows the frost is coming.
The bond formed between them was immediate, yet delicate. It was a thread woven by destiny itself, one that shimmered in beauty but trembled with foreknowledge. She offered him her love under one condition, that he would never seek her on the sacred day of her solitude, that he would trust her completely, even in her absence. He agreed without hesitation, his heart too full of wonder to question. What is a promise, after all, to a man who believes he has found salvation? Love made him bold, and boldness made him blind. The world around them seemed to approve their union. The forests grew green again, the rivers ran clear, and fortune, once turned away from Raymondan, began to favor him. Together they built a castle where water and stone met in perfect harmony, a reflection of their two souls entwined. From their love were born sons, bright and strange, each marked in some subtle way by their mother's hidden lineage. Some said the boys were blessed, others whispered they were cursed. But in those years of peace, Melusин's laughter filled the halls, and Raymondan forgot his former sorrow. Yet even in joy there was distance. Melusin moved through her days like a melody half heard, her grace untouched by time. She was mother, wife, and spirit all at once. At night, when Raymondin reached for her, he felt the warmth of her skin, but also something else, something fluid, elusive, like the edge of a dream that slips away upon waking. Her sensuality did not blaze, it shimmered. She loved through stillness, through tenderness, through the silent devotion that even the air around her seemed alive. She did not need to speak her desire. It was there in the curve of her shoulders, in the way she breathed his name, in the peace that enveloped him when her eyes met his. But beneath that calm surface was a tension she never allowed him to see, the effort of holding herself together, of hiding the half of her nature that belonged to the water's depths. Raymondin sensed it sometimes, in the pauses between their words, in the faint shadows that crossed her face when the moon was full. He would reach for her then, as though touch could reassure him of her humanity, and she would smile, tenderly, but her silence said what she could not, that love built upon secrecy is both sanctuary and snare. Their love had ripened into habit, yet habit in their world was never peace. It was the thin ice over a deep current. The years passed, soft as silk, and the castle they built together stood as a monument to devotion. Children's laughter filled the courtyards. The river below sang with calm. To anyone looking from afar, Melusine and Raymondan were the image of divine harmony, proof that love could defy the boundaries of heaven and earth. But beneath that perfection, a silence had begun to grow, slow, patient, and hungry.
It began with the smallest of things, the way Melusine's eyes lingered on the water when no one watched, the way her smile faded at dusk before her solitude. She still slipped away each seventh day, disappearing into her secret chamber. No one was permitted near, and the air around it seemed to breathe with its own rhythm, heavy and alive. Raymondin tried not to wonder. For years he had held his promise like a relic, believing love was strengthened by trust. But trust is fragile when love burns too brightly. It feeds on certainty, and in the absence of certainty, it begins to tremble. He would lie awake when she was gone, tracing the imprint of her hand upon the sheets, the scent of her skin lingering like rain. He remembered her gaze, the tenderness that softened her every movement, the mystery that lingered just beyond reach, and he ached with questions he dared not ask. Desire, once simple, grew complex. It was no longer hunger of the body, but yearning of the soul to know, to see. What lay behind her solitude? What was it she hid, even from him who loved her above all? And with that yearning came guilt, a quiet guilt that ate away at his peace. He loved her, yet he was human, and humans are not made to live with mysteries pressing against their hearts. Meanwhile, Melusine bore that weight of the same silence with fragile grace. Her love for Raymondin was true and fierce. Every breath beside him was defiance against her fate. Yet she felt the pull of the water, the ancient rhythm that called her back to her origin. Her Saturdays were not indulgence, but survival. In those hidden hours, she shed the form that allowed her to walk among mortals. The serpent tail that replaced her legs was no mark of evil, no monstrous punishment. It was her essence unveiled, the living proof of her otherworldly blood. When she was alone in her chamber, she would slip into a pool of sacred water, and the illusion of humanity would dissolve. The sensation was painful and liberating. The shimmer of scales, the soft sweep of her tail through the pool, and the whisper of freedom against her flesh.
In those hours, she was not wife nor mother, but Melusine as she was born, neither woman nor beast, but something between. She would close her eyes, feeling the pulse of the river echo within her body, the heartbeat of the world she had left behind. And as she bathed in her true form, she thought of him, of Raymondin's warmth, his hands that had held her so tenderly without knowing what they concealed. That tenderness was her joy and her torment. For every touch, every kiss, every whisper of affection drew her closer to the brink. Love demanded honesty, yet honesty would destroy them. Outside her door, the world began to whisper. Servants murmured about the lady's disappearances. Strange sounds, they said, came from her chamber on the seventh day, like the rush of waves or the brush of scales against stone. Raymondin dismissed their talk with anger, but once the words were spoken, they rooted in his mind. And there, in the fertile soil of love and fear, grew the seed of his undoing. He tried to silence his doubts, but they returned in the quiet hours of the night, when her absence stretched like a shadow across the bed. His thoughts twisted upon themselves. What could she be hiding? Why must she lock herself away so completely? Love became longing. Longing became torment.
Melusine felt the change before he spoke of it. She sensed it in the tremor of his hands, in the way his eyes sought her with both devotion and suspicion. She would brush her lips against his cheek and whisper, "Do not look where light does not belong." He would nod, but the warning only deepened his hunger to know. Their desire became a mirror of their conflict, beautiful, dangerous, inevitable. Each night they came together with a desperation that bordered on prayer. Her body, luminous beneath his touch, was both sanctuary and mystery. She did not resist him, for he was her anchor to the human world. Yet each embrace reminded her how fragile her secret had become. He began to see signs everywhere. The faint shimmer upon her skin after she bathed, the subtle pattern along her back that glowed like scales beneath moonlight. Once, half asleep, he thought he heard the faint hiss of water within her breath. He tried to tell himself it was illusion, that love had made him mad. But curiosity is its own curse, and it always finds a way to justify itself.
One night, when the moon hung heavy over the river, Raymondine stood before her chamber door. He could hear the faint murmur of water within, rhythmic and alive. His heart pounded with guilt and reverence. He told himself that love must be built on truth, that he deserved to know the woman he had given his soul to. But beneath that reasoning lay a simpler truth. He could not bear the not knowing any longer. Inside, Melusine floated in her secret pool, her tail shimmering like liquid silver beneath the surface. Her hair flowed around her like dark silk, her face serene in that fragile moment of freedom. She was beautiful beyond imagining, both divine and sorrowful, the embodiment of every contradiction that love brings. When the door creaked open, the world seemed to stop breathing. For a heartbeat, Raymondine could not move. Awe and terror collided within him as his gaze fell upon her, the creature he loved revealed in her truest form. The scales along her tail gleamed like moonlight broken into tears, and her body, half human, half waterborne, seemed carved from longing itself. Melusine turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was no scream, no anger, only a silence that pierced deeper than any blade. In that instant, she understood everything. The betrayal, the inevitability, the end written in their beginning. Raymondine fell to his knees, trembling. Words failed him. What he saw was both monstrous and sacred. He could not reconcile the woman he had loved with the being before him. Yet even as his mind recoiled, his heart wept. For she was still Melusine, still the voice that had comforted him, the hands that had built his world from ruin. She looked at him with eyes full of infinite sorrow. "You have seen what was not meant for mortal sight," she whispered, her voice trembling like a ripple across still water. And now love must pay the price of curiosity. The illusion shattered, but not the love. That was the cruelest part. For even as she drew away from him, even as the curse began to stir within her, his heart reached for her still. He called her name again and again, but the sound of his voice could not mend what trust had broken. She stepped back into the shadows, her tears falling into the pool below, merging with the water that had always been her truest home. The secret was undone. The sacred had been violated. And yet, beneath the sorrow, desire still lingered. A desire transformed, sanctified by loss. Their love, once a haven, now became a haunting. The air around the castle grew heavy with silence. Raymondine could not forget the vision of her, nor forgive himself for the act that tore them apart. And Melusine, caught between the worlds of flesh and spirit, carried his betrayal within her heart like a wound that would never heal. Love had made them divine. Truth had made them mortal. And as the river murmured beyond the castle walls, the water seemed to weep for them both.
Under the trembling veil of moonlight, the castle lay hushed, as if the air itself had withdrawn to witness what love and fate had conspired to reveal. The river beyond whispered against the stones, its rhythm slow and mournful, echoing the pulse of the unseen chamber where Melusine's secret life shimmered between water and shadow. Raymondin stood at the threshold, one hand pressed to the cold door. He could hear it, the sound that had haunted his dreams for years, the steady, liquid cadence of water moving with impossible grace. His chest ached with longing and fear. Every instinct urged him to turn away, to honor the promise that had once bound their souls in trust. But desire, curiosity shaped by love and poisoned by doubt, dragged him forward like a tide too powerful to resist. He whispered her name, once, softly. Then the door gave way. The sight that met him was not one meant for mortal eyes. The chamber was lit by the pallor of moonlight streaming through a high window, and in that light, water glowed with a sacred sheen. There she was, Melusine, bathed in the silver pool at its center. Her back arched slightly, her hair a dark current around her shoulders, her skin luminous as dawn over still water. For an instant, he thought she was an angel, radiant and divine. Then his breath caught. The lower half of her body rippled beneath the surface, not legs, but the long, graceful sweep of a serpent's tail covered in scales that shimmered with liquid fire. They moved like living jewels, emerald, sapphire, pale opal, each glint of light a confession, each movement a sigh. It was beauty so intense it crossed into pain, as if the world itself could not contain it. She turned. Their eyes met. The moment was a wound.
Raymond staggered as though struck by the sight. She did not hide herself, nor did she scream. Her face held a serenity beyond sorrow, and in her gaze flickered everything she had kept from him: love, fear, shame, and an ancient dignity that had survived centuries of solitude. Raymondine. Her voice came like a breath over water, soft, trembling, infinite. You should not have come. He could not speak. Words shattered upon his tongue. All the questions that had devoured him, what she was, what she did behind this door, collapsed into a single truth. He had never truly known her, yet he had loved her more deeply than he had known how to love himself. The silence stretched, dense, as the space between heartbeats.
Her tail, half luminous in the moonlight, swayed gently through the water, the sound a tender whisper. "This is what I am," she said, almost to herself. Half of the world above, half of the world below. A daughter of the river, a creature born of longing. Her words wrapped around him like the water's current, gentle, irresistible. He felt the pulse of his own heart against the rhythm of the pool, each beat a plea for forgiveness, for understanding. He took a step forward, trembling. "Melusine, She raised her hand. "Do not." He froze. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, not from anger, but from the ache of inevitability. "Love is fragile when built upon secrets," she whispered. "But the truth breaks it faster still." The air grew heavy. The sound of the water deepened, as though the pool itself mourned. Melusine's hair clung to her shoulders, each strand glittering with droplets that seemed almost to weep. Her breath came in soft, shuddering waves, and he could feel the tremor of her soul reaching toward his as the world pulled them apart. "Do you hate me?" she asked. He shook his head violently, words stumbling out between sobs. "No, never! God, you are still my heart." She smiled, faint and sorrowful. "Then why do you tremble?" Because she was too much, too beautiful, too otherworldly, too impossible. Because love had made her human in his eyes, and now the truth returned her to something divine, unreachable. Because her beauty was no longer something he could hold, but something he must worship from afar. She rose slightly, her form half emerging from the pool. Water streamed down her body like tears of light. The air trembled with the scent of rain and stone. Each movement carried a haunting sensuality, not the crude allure of flesh, but the devastating grace of a being who embodied both desire and despair. He wanted to reach for her, to touch her one last time, to beg forgiveness, not for seeing, but for doubting. Yet he stood motionless, bound by awe. The truth of her existence was too pure, too terrible.
Melusine looked upon him as if memorizing every contour of his face, every line of the man who had given her love and taken her secrecy. I wanted you to know me, but not like this. Her voice cracked, the sound breaking him open.
Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the distant hills. Inside, the world seemed suspended between breaths. She reached for him, her hand trembling. For a heartbeat, their fingers met, the smallest, simplest touch, and it felt like eternity collapsing into an instant. Her skin was cool and soft, the texture of silk brushed by rain. He wanted to pull her close, to hold her until time forgot them, but as soon as he tried, the water between them surged, pushing them apart as though nature itself decreed that what had been joined must now divide. Her tears mingled with the pool. "You have seen me," she whispered, "and what is seen cannot be unseen. The curse awakens." He shook his head wildly. "No, please, whatever this is, we can endure it." But she was already fading. The moonlight flickered against her form, scales dulling, hair lifting as if caught by an unseen current. The air rippled with power, the ancient weight of a promise broken. "I will always love you," she said, her voice echoing like the echo of the tide in a seashell. "Remember me not as you saw me now, but as I was when we dreamed." Then the pool blazed with silver light, and Melusine's cry rose with the water, half sorrow, half ecstasy. It filled the room, filled his heart, filled the night until the very stones seemed to weep. The sound was unbearable, too full of love, too full of loss. When the light dimmed, she was gone. Only the water remained, trembling under the moon's gaze. Raymondine fell to his knees, his breath ragged, his hands pressed against the damp floor. The scent of her lingered, fresh and faintly sweet, like rain over lilies, and it cut him deeper than any blade. He lifted his gaze to the window, where the moon shone pale and merciless, and whispered her name into the emptiness. Melusine. No answer came, only the river's endless murmur, the eternal song of love undone by its own desire to know. Outside, the water glowed faintly, as though her spirit had taken refuge there, forever flowing between worlds. Some said they could see her still on moonlit nights, her form rippling beneath the surface, her eyes luminous with both sorrow and tenderness. For Raymondine, the vision of her true form never left him. It haunted his waking hours and his dreams, the image of beauty beyond mortal reach, a love both blessed and cursed, too sacred for this world. And in that haunting, the sensual and the tragic became one, love and loss, truth and mystery, forever entwined like the glimmering coils of her vanished tale beneath the moonlit water. The night that followed her revelation never truly ended. Though the sun rose and fell, though the river continued its eternal murmur,
Raymondon's world remained locked in twilight, a place between memory and mourning. He walked the corridors of his castle like a ghost among the living, the echo of her name haunting every stone. Melusine, each syllable a sigh, each whisper a wound. The chamber where he had seen her true form was sealed, but no lock could quiet the sound of running water behind its walls. Sometimes, in the stillness before dawn, he would swear he heard her voice within that gentle current, calling to him through the veil that now divided their worlds. It was not accusation that lingered in her tone, but sorrow, endless, tender sorrow. The curse had awakened just as she had foretold. The air around the castle changed. The once lush fields seemed paler. The fountains wept slower. The river's rhythm grew strange. Some nights, the wind itself carried a faint hiss, like breath drawn through tears. And always that sensation of being watched, not by malice, but by love transformed into lament. The people whispered of enchantment. They spoke of the lady Melusine vanished in silver light, of the lord who had broken a sacred vow. Some said she had turned into a dragon, her wings vast as despair, circling the castle's towers in mourning. Others swore she returned each night as a shimmering mist over the water, her cry the echo of a broken heart. But Raymondon knew none of these stories could capture her truth. She had not been monster nor phantom. She had been love itself, wild, fragile, and far too divine for human hands to hold. He could still feel the memory of her touch, cool, soft, fleeting as dew. When he closed his eyes, he saw again the silver shimmer of her scales beneath the moon, the sorrow in her gaze that had been both forgiveness and farewell. He would have given anything to undo that moment, to unsee, to unknow. But knowledge, once gained, can never return to innocence. Days bled into weeks, weeks into years. He ruled still, but his heart no longer belonged to the world of men. His castle became a monument to absence. The laughter of their children faded into memory, their voices echoes within empty halls. He found no comfort in prayer, for the gods had given him what he once desired, and then shown him the cost of desiring too much. Every seventh day he wandered to the riverbank, where mist clung to the reeds like pale silk. There he would kneel, his reflection trembling upon the water's surface. Sometimes he thought he saw her there, half-formed, her face within the current, her eyes luminous with longing. Her lips would move, shaping words he could never hear, and when he reached out, the image broke into ripples that vanished beneath his trembling fingers. He would whisper to the water, "Forgive me." And though no answer came, the river's sigh would soften, as if some ancient mercy stirred within its depths. The people came to fear that river. They said it was cursed, that those who lingered too long near its banks would dream of a woman who wept beneath the surface, her voice calling their names. Some called her the Water Mother, others the Serpent Bride. But the old ones, those who remembered the days when the castle thrived, they called her Melusine, and they spoke her name with reverence, not fear. As years passed, Raymondin aged, yet time could not dull the ache she had left within him. He ceased to seek solace in others, for none could touch the place she had once filled. His nights were endless vigils, His days were quiet penance. Sometimes, in the hush of twilight, he would think he heard the faint beat of wings high above, or the delicate hum of scales brushing wind. Then he would close his eyes, tears glistening like moonlight upon his cheeks, and whisper, "She watches still." He began to write letters to her, pages upon pages that no one would ever read. In them, he spoke not of regret alone, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the years she had given him, for the love that had transcended nature's cruelty. He sealed each letter and cast it into the river, watching the parchment dissolve into the current, believing the water would carry his words to wherever she now dwelled. Sometimes, after the letters vanished, the river would glow faintly, as if answering. When death finally came to Rimondine, it did not arrive as an enemy. It came softly, like the brush of cool water against the skin. He was found seated by the river's edge, his face turned upward to the moon, his lips curved in the faintest of smiles. And in that moment, the air shimmered with light, the same silver radiance that had once surrounded her.
The villagers swore they saw her that night, a figure rising from the river, half woman, half serpent, her form radiant and sorrowful. She hovered above his still body, her hair flowing around her like shadowed silk. For a breathless instant, she leaned close and pressed a kiss to his brow, a kiss of farewell, or perhaps of reunion. Then she dissolved into mist, the water reclaiming her once more. From that night onward, the river was said to sing more softly. Its current, though deep, flowed with a gentler rhythm, as if morning had finally become peace. And so their story passed into legend. Children would whisper of the lady who loved too deeply, of the man who looked when love required blindness. They spoke of curses and transformations, of water that remembers sorrow. But those who listened closely, those who stood by the river at dusk, when the air shimmered with the scent of rain, knew there was more to the tale. They could feel it, the pulse of something tender, eternal. Because love, even when broken, does not end. It changes form, becoming river, mist, moonlight, flowing through time itself, carrying the ache and the beauty of what once was. Melusин's song became that of the waters, a melody of loss that healed as it hurt, of desire that remained even after the body dissolved. She had been both salvation and destruction, both blessing and curse. And in that duality lay the truth of love itself. It was said that on certain nights when the moon hung low, a soft shimmer rose from the river beside the ruins of Raymondin's castle. Those who dared to look claimed to see her shape gliding beneath the surface, her tail trailing light, her eyes calm and endless as the tide. They said she did not weep anymore, for in the silence between the ripples, love had finally learned to breathe. Time, like water, never forgets. It carries the traces of what once lived within it, the warmth of touch,
the salt of tears, the echo of words spoken in love and broken by silence. Melusine's tale, whispered through centuries, lingers not because it speaks of magic or curses, but because it unveils the truth of every heart that has ever dared to love beyond reason. Her story was never merely about a woman who hid her true form, or a man who could not bear unknowing. It was about the trembling thread between trust and desire, between seeing and believing, between loving what we imagine and accepting what is. For love, when stripped of illusion, reveals not perfection but vulnerability, the soft human ache to be understood completely, and the equal terror that such understanding might destroy the illusion that binds us. Raymond Dean's gaze was not the first nor the last to falter under the weight of wonder. Curiosity is both the light that draws us and the flame that burns us. We reach for what glimmers in the dark, longing to claim it, to name it, to make it ours. But love is not possession, it is surrender to mystery, to imperfection, to the unknown that lives within another soul. Melusine had offered him that mystery, wrapped in tenderness and secrecy. In her silence was devotion, in her absence trust. Yet his yearning to know became the fracture through which love's light escaped. When he looked upon her and saw what was never meant for mortal sight, he beheld not a monster, but the mirror of his own hunger, the ache to bridge the impossible. And in that moment, the divine and the human met, collided, and broke apart. Every love carries within it that same fragility. To love deeply is to walk the edge of revelation, to risk seeing the truth that lies beneath beauty's surface. We love because we crave to be touched by something infinite, even as we know it cannot remain. And when love slips beyond our grasp, when it returns to the waters from which it came, it leaves behind not emptiness, but memory, a pulse, a shimmer, a song. Melusine became that song. The river that once bore her reflection now carries her essence, endless, gentle, forgiving. The moon above, pale and unblinking, still traces her path each night across the silvered surface, reminding those who linger to listen that beauty endures even in loss. If one stands by the water at dusk and closes their eyes, they may hear her sigh within the current, a sound neither wholly sorrowful nor sweet, but something between, the sound of love remembering itself.
Raymond Dean's castle has long since crumbled into stone and ivy, its halls devoured by silence. Yet the river remains, flowing as it always has, its surface rippling beneath the same eternal moon. The world forgets the faces, the voices, the vows, but the elements remember. The water knows her shape, the air her breath, the earth her sorrow. And so through them she endures, not as a warning, but as a whisper of what it means to love without measure. In every story of loss there lives a quiet grace, and in every ending a beginning disguised. Melusine's departure was not erasure, it was transformation. Her body dissolved into the language of nature itself, her longing transfigured into song. The river became her voice, the mist her veil, the moon her watchful eye. Through these she continues to touch the world, gentle as memory, vast as forgiveness. And perhaps that is what love truly seeks, not permanence, but presence, not to hold, but to feel, not to possess, but to remember. Remendin's sin was never that he loved too little, but that he could not bear the boundaries of mystery. His heart demanded certainty where love requires faith. And so he lost her, not to cruelty, but to the inevitable cost of wanting too much. Yet, even in loss, he was not abandoned. The river never ceased to sing to him. The air never ceased to move softly through the reeds, carrying her name in its rhythm. That was her mercy, that she remained even in absence, even in sorrow. Love, after all, does not vanish, it changes form. It becomes the silence after laughter, the sigh before sleep, the shimmer of light that lingers on the water long after the moon has passed. To those who still tell her story, Melusine is neither cursed nor condemned. She is the keeper of love's secret, the reminder that beauty is born from fragility, that mystery is the pulse of devotion. Her scales, her sorrow, her song, they are not signs of monstrosity, but symbols of the divine truth hidden in imperfection.
And so her tale does not end with loss, but with understanding. The river flows, the moon watches. Somewhere within their eternal rhythm, Melusine still breathes, her spirit woven into the very fabric of the world. She is the sigh between heartbeats, the shimmer that turns grief into grace. If you stand beside a quiet stream and listen closely, you might hear her, just beyond sound, just beneath knowing. Her voice will rise and fall like the tide, whispering the truth she lived and died for, that love is both salvation and surrender, that to see is to risk losing, and that even in breaking, love leaves beauty behind. And when the wind passes over the water, bending the reeds as the moon scatters her light across the ripples, it feels as though she is there still, watching, forgiving, waiting, not as a ghost, but as memory eternal. For Melusine was never meant to remain upon the earth. She was meant to remind it, to remind us that love, like water, cannot be held, only felt as it moves through our fingers, that its beauty lies in its impermanence and its truth in its return. So the river flows, the moon shines, and her song continues, soft, eternal, serene. A hymn to all who have loved and lost, to all who have seen beauty too closely, and to all who understand that in every ending there is a trace of something infinite still. And somewhere in that silver quiet, where the air tastes of rain and memory, Melusine smiles.